Hi everyone, my name is Ian Biazzo. I'm excited to talk with you today about a project I've been working on with a colleague, Pedro Quintana Asensio, examining the impacts of prescribed fire on tree frogs here in Central Florida, USA. I know many of us are already aware of the importance of fire for ecosystem health, but I'm still going to set the stage for the impacts here in Florida, because Florida is unique. It's in the southeast United States, and it is actually a lightning strike hotspot. Historically, that means that the ecosystems here evolved with periodic wildfires. Those fires created a mosaic landscape shaping diversity, but today, prescribed fires filled that role, and therefore they are key management tools for restoration and ecosystem health overall. One of the most common ecosystem types of the southeast United States, including Florida, is the pine flatwoods ecosystem. These are typically mesic systems with wetlands scattered throughout, and as you can see in the image, it's an open canopy layer of tall pine trees. In central Florida, the most common of the pines is the longleaf pine, and there's usually little to no subcanopy. However, there is a dense ground layer comprised of shrubs, grasses, and forbs. Given that this is a pyrogenic system, we know the historical average fire return interval was about 3 years. Here's an example of a pine flatwoods ecosystem right before a fire on top and right after a fire on the bottom. Earlier I mentioned that the fire creates a mosaic on the landscape. So you can see in the bottom image there are still some unburned areas where there's some shrubs, and that's perfectly normal. We know fire is important for the ecosystem, but why look at frogs? Well, besides being very cute, they are a numerically abundant vertebrate group, which means they're important for the food web. What I also think is very interesting is that they have both upland and wetland requirements for their life histories. Furthermore, they can't fly away or run fast from fire, so there's a unique behavior there. They're also considered ecological indicators. I jokingly refer to them as sponges with legs. Their skin is very absorbent. When an animal faces a disturbance, like fire, it has three main options. It can run away, hide in place, or it might die. This question is really interesting for tree frogs because they spend 90% of their time away from water. So when a fire comes, they can't just hop into water. They have to run away, hide somewhere, or they might die, which are all testable hypotheses. And here you see a frog actually climbing up some recently burned tree bark. To start to explore the impacts of prescribed fire on tree frogs, I needed an area that had both a robust fire program, but also a lot of frogs. Luckily, Florida has both. Florida is the peninsula outlined in green on the globe at the bottom. And right in the middle of the peninsula is a property owned and managed by the Nature Conservancy called the Disney Wilderness Preserve. The Disney Wilderness Preserve is over 4,600 hectares, mostly pine flatwoods. There are wetlands scattered throughout, but most importantly, it has a robust ecological fire program. They burn during Florida's fire season. It is at the wildland-urban interface. The northwest corner of the map does show some suburban development, but there's still a lot of secluded wilderness that is limited to the public, which results in fewer invasive species. In fact, there were no invasive frogs encountered during this study. I'm going to bring your attention now to the north half of the preserve. This is the experimental design I have set up. Each of the four circles you see are wetlands that served as the focal point for four plots. Two fire plots, which are the red ones, and two control plots, the bluish ones. The fire plots are ones that were scheduled to burn this year in 2021. The control plots burned in 2020 last year and are not scheduled to burn for another 2 years. Therefore, they can act as a control for this experiment. At each of the plots, I found 3 mature longleaf pine trees. So that's 3 trees set up per plot for a total of 12 trees. There are the little yellow dots you see. The basic configuration of them is around each of the wetlands. At each of these trees, I took 60 centimeter PVC pipes that are open at one end and set them up at 3 meters, 6 meters, 9 meters, and 9 plus meters when possible up the trees. 9 plus was ideally 12 if the tree was tall enough, but sometimes 11 or a little closer to 10. These pipes were checked every 2 weeks from March to September 2021. We stopped checking pipes in September because that's what is the peak hurricane season in Florida, and we wanted to end the experiment before any of the trees could be compromised by hurricane damage. But of course, to study tree frogs, you have to go where the animals are. So in that case, I had to go up the trees. Here you can see the basic setup of the experiment. You can see those 60 centimeter PVC pipes set at heights of 3 meters, 6 meters, 9 meters, and that designation of 9 plus meters. Kind of at the top of that tree, you can see it in the top of that image there too. The sub-image shows a tree frog that climbed up one of the PVC pipes, and seconds later, he actually did go inside the pipe. To make this setup happen, we used a technique called single rope technique, combined with rapid ascension and descension equipment. So I get up the tree, I look inside the pipe, and sometimes I see these little frogs looking back at me, and they have their own opinion of me. We remove the frogs from the pipes by putting them into large Ziploc bags, clear bags. This kind of protects them and makes it easier to process them on the ground. They get lowered down with me. So going up the tree, collecting the frogs, and coming down, the total climb time was less than 5 minutes per tree. And a fun fact is if you were to stack all the trees on top of each other and multiply them by the number of sampling occasions, it comes out to about 1.6 kilometers of total climbing distance. Once on the ground, frogs were assigned a unique color VIE tag, which is a visible implant elastomer shown with the arrows in the sub-images. The left arrow is pointed to a purple VIE tag, and the right one is showing an orange and a green one. So based on the number of colors you use and the number of locations on the animal, you can combine them to make many different combinations. We also recorded size, sex, and location data for every frog. We released the frogs near the base of the tree. Doing so gave them the option to go elsewhere in the ecosystem, but as we'll see, the frogs quite often went right back up the tree. And total handling time for these frogs was less than 5 minutes, often much less. Results at a quick glance here, we had 14 sampling occasions over the 6 months. All but one individual belonged to the same species, Dryophytes, formerly Hyla femoralis, which is the pinewood tree frog. We caught 75 individuals plus an additional 198 recaptures of those individuals, giving us 273 total data points for our study. Now let's take a look at the results for one of the burn units. This is burn unit 4, and we want to look here because this is the first one in our study that experienced fire. I also want to show you first this circle area over to the left, the beginning of the study. The lighter shade shows new frogs, the darker shade shows recaptured frogs. So to walk you through March and April, we caught 2 frogs. Then the next time we caught no new ones, but we recaptured the same 2. On the third time, we caught no new ones, but we recaptured 1. And then there's a spike in the number of new frogs. Well, that's where the fire was. April 16th, there was a fire, and then we had a spike in both the number of new frogs and the number of frogs recaptured. This parabolic shape indicates that frogs entered the trees, stayed for some period of time, and either died or left. However, our models show there's no reason to suspect they all just miraculously died. There was no mortality, no obvious mortality events across our study. The survivals were comparable. If we look at all of the units now, we can see that most units only get at most 4 new frogs per sampling occasion. The orange color here is the previous unit we showed, unit 4. So you can see after the April 16th fire, there is that spike. What I want to show you now is on July 21st, there was a fire in the other experimental unit, which was unit SW. And that's indicated by the yellowish bars. So you do see another shorter parabola there, what looks like in the data a little signal amongst the noise. But we need to test these with ecological models, which we did. We ran generalized linear mixed models using a Bayesian framework to test hypotheses based on the importance of fire, whether burned or unburned, location, and time effects. The models that showed abundance as a factor of the fire, the tree locations, and the time, when time and tree were random effects, was the model that had the best support. What I'd like to show you now is the posterior distribution for the Bayesian models. First, the blue model is the null model, assuming no impact on new frogs from the location of the tree, the time interval sampling occasion, or fire itself. It's a null model. It spikes around 0.5, indicating about 0.5 new frogs per tree per occasion. But there is an impact of fire. If we look at the models, the gray distribution is when we're before the fire or for the units that have no fire, and it spikes well below that null average, and it has a pretty narrow distribution. But if we look at the spike compared to the red spike, it has flattened, and it has also spread out that distribution, indicating there is more of a chance to get more frogs after a fire. Interestingly, the black image, the black graph on the right, the post-fire regreen, is after the fire, but about 6 weeks after, when things on the ground start to regreen, the plants start to return to normal. Well, so does the distribution. It starts to shift back towards the left, towards that gray model. Frogs are going up the trees immediately after a fire, but after the fire, fewer new frogs are going up the trees. This is support for using trees as a refugia during a fire. Perhaps it's not surprising that tree frogs go up a tree during a fire, but it is nice to see this represented in the data. Similarly, this graph shows the model for the total, which is the new plus the recaptures, what we'll call the abundance. And there is still an effect. You can see that the gray no fire model still spikes well below the null. The red here still flattens out, and the spike is lower, indicating again more of a chance to get more frogs. The null in this case has shifted to around 1.5, 1.6, but that's because this is total abundance, which is their new frogs plus the recaptures. We also wanted to look at movement up and down the tree. To do that, we used a multi-state model under a Bayesian framework where we treated each height of the tree as a state. And we included a fifth observable state, which is unseen, meaning the frog has either died or has left the study altogether. We can't disentangle those two factors. The table shows transition probabilities. So each row adds to 1, each column adds to 1. And these are the probabilities of a frog moving up or down a tree from one time interval to the next, one sampling occasion to the next. The diagonal has by far the highest probabilities, indicating a frog is most likely to stay at the height it was previously found in, which is a case for high site fidelity. They stay in one spot. The model also gave us high apparent survival. We call it apparent survival because we don't know the ones that have died versus emigrated, but the survival is still high here. Similarly, we have very high recapture rates at each height. Some important takeaways and management considerations are that fires cause these tree frogs to move up and across the habitat using tall trees as an escape. The species shows high site fidelity, survival and recapture are both high, even post-fire, but we still have a lot to learn and disentangle in these pyrogenic systems. I definitely look forward to questions and comments. Thank you so much.